Good morning, everyone, and a really warm welcome to the launch of our newest employer toolkit, Disability Disclosure in the Workplace. My name is Boda, and I'm the Program Manager of Employers for Change, a program of the Open Doors Initiative. I'm a white female with chin-length brown hair, frameless glasses, and today I'm wearing a white shirt. I also have a green virtual background with our logos of Employers for Change and the Open Doors Initiative. And we are really glad to see this very high interest for the toolkit and the launch. So as I mentioned just now, we have more than 140 people joined. And in the room, we have employers from really various industries from all different sectors. From the public sector, we have many organizations, county councils, different departments. And also we have employers from the private and even charity sector from all across the country. So thank you again for being here. The session is being recorded and your microphones are turned off for the duration of the presentation and the panel discussion, but after for the Q&A, we can unmute you. My colleague Mo is here to provide any technical support if needed, and we'll be sharing more information in the chat as well. So please use the chat functionality to input any reactions or share your thoughts during the session. We can really make it interactive as much as possible through that, so please feel free to use that. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function, which is on the top of your screen. And thank you for submitting really great questions already in advance during the registration. We try to incorporate them in the presentation and in our panel discussion, but hopefully we will have time for it in the end. Also, captions are available during the session. You can turn it on under the 3 dots and more, and then choose language and speech. And also just to mention that there were no other reasonable accommodation requests. And for this reason, we don't have an ISL interpreter for this session, because as you might know, there are very few ISL interpreters in the country, and maybe they are needed at other events today. Just for the agenda, what we will be covering in this 75 minutes, we will do a short introduction, then we will hear some insights from the toolkit, then we will have an exciting panel discussion, and hopefully time for some Q&A. I just want to mention, if we don't manage to go through the questions, we are more than happy to still collect them and answer them in writing and send them out with the recording and the toolkit. So feel free to add your questions in. And as mentioned, Employers for Change is a program of the Open Doors Initiative. And Open Doors Initiative's key mission is to enable equitable access to employability to underrepresented groups. We do that through a network of partners, NGOs, and also working with different government departments. We have around 130 partners, and we are open for more partnerships. So if you are interested, feel free to get in touch. We are really grateful for all the partners who have contributed to the toolkit and who are here as well for the panel discussion. We support different groups with a specific focus also on people with disabilities, and with that we support job seekers with disability, but also refugees, asylum seekers and migrants, people with a criminal history, people from the traveler or LGBTQAI community, and we focus also on the intersectionality of all those identities. But we understand that the topic of disability inclusion is really broad and complex, and we are there to support employers to navigate this complexity. So Employers for Change, we are an employer disability information service funded by the Department of Children, Disability and Equality. And we have the aim to really empower employers all across the country with all the information needed to hire, employ, manage and retain staff with disabilities. And we do it in different ways. We provide free supports. For example, we do different consultations around supporting how to create your policies or review the existing ones, consult around your reasonable accommodations practices, or how to introduce the reasonable accommodation passport, how to navigate the different government supports which are available, or to support you in setting up or managing your employee resource groups. We also share a lot of information and different resources, such as with different toolkits and guides, for example, the one we are launching today, but we have several already around inclusive recruitment or language, for example, which is a big question that we always get. So around disability terminology, inclusive and accessible communication, and also advancing disability awareness training, which is a toolkit that was also recently launched. Because we believe that in order to make a really meaningful change, we need education and we need to raise awareness in order to start removing barriers to employment and also to preempt any kind of prejudice and discrimination. And of course, from awareness, we need to move that to action, but it's important to start with training. We have trained over almost 3,000 employees in the last 2 years across sectors and industries. We provide tailored trainings, and they can be specific for different groups, such as for all staff, or maybe just for your communications teams, or for your management or HR. The sessions are eligible for 90% work and access funding for non-public employers, and they are free for government departments. The most popular sessions are around disability awareness, which is CPD accredited. Also, we have sessions specifically for managers around disability inclusion. Now we will have around disclosure as well. Also recruitment, communications, and reasonable accommodation passport. You can scan the QR code that we have in order to follow us on LinkedIn or to learn more about that, and feel free to contact us. We are more than happy to discuss how we can support you. And why this topic is important, many of you might know these numbers already, but it's important to remind ourselves that in Ireland, we have more than 1.1 million people living with a disability based on the latest census. To put that into perspective, it means that 1 in 5 of us have a disability. So just in this virtual room, maybe 40 of us might have a disability. I'm taking one statistical slot as I have an invisible disability, but this is true for our teams, for our organizations, that even if we know or might not know, there are definitely people with disabilities. And unfortunately, when it comes to employment, Ireland is still one of the lowest in the EU when it comes to the employment rate of persons with disabilities. We are currently at 43% in comparison to the 54% of the EU. This is why we believe that altogether, we can really make a change. And thanks again for being here. And the culture of disclosure and creating psychological safety in order to do that is so important. So this is why we are really excited to launch the toolkit that will be shared with you today. And with that, I will hand it over to Eoin O'Herlihy, who is the Managing Director of O'Herlihy Access Consultancy, who have done the research, and he has been the research lead. And we are really thankful to him and the whole team for this fantastic work. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, everyone, and you're very welcome to the session. Just of all, first before I start, I'd like to thank Anna and her team, Anna, Claire and Mo, and everyone in Employers for Change for supporting us through the journey, I suppose, of creating the Disability Disclosure Toolkit for Employers for Change. So thanks for all the support. Also, thanks for everyone who was involved in the consultation process that took place as part of the project. And thanks to everyone in the OHAC's team who was involved in the project. So I suppose just in the time slot that I have today, I'd like to just talk a bit about the toolkit, how it was developed, and I suppose some of the key content of the toolkit itself. And I suppose before I start, just like to say, when we were looking at developing the guidelines and the toolkit itself, we were we at the starting point was to look at 3 different levels. So the first level was looking at a kind of strategy and a framework. So I suppose being strategic about how organizations could improve on the whole area of disability inclusion, and I suppose the whole area of employment with people with disabilities. The second area we looked at was processes and procedures that organizations could implement, I suppose, in order to make effective changes within their own organizations. And the third area we looked at was, well, what are all the key criteria or all the key areas that need to be addressed in order, I suppose, to be effective in what you want to do in the area of disability disclosure. So We also looked at the challenges we also looked at some of the challenges, but also practical solutions that you can implement within your own organizations. And you'll see when you get your hands on the toolkit that those elements are all built into the process. So I have about 15 minutes to do my presentation today, but what I'd like to do is challenge everyone here today to pick out some of the key themes that you'll see coming up, both from Anna's presentation and my own presentation, and I'll do a quick summary at the end and see if you've picked up on some of the themes that are, I suppose, filtered throughout the guidelines and toolkit themselves. So I suppose before, just to start and set the context, the main objective of the project was, I suppose, to create an information and a practical toolkit for employers to allow them to I suppose, effectively collect their own disability data, and to use that data to make, I suppose, practical and informed solutions to address the needs of people with disabilities in the workplace. So to create effective disclosure processes, collect, measure and manage data for employees with disabilities, and to, I suppose, embark on a continuous improvement journey in addressing the needs of people with disabilities in the workplace. So part of the process when we were doing our research was to do consultation with people with disabilities, people with lived experience of disability. And some of the key themes that came out of that process were, I suppose, and again, some people will be quite familiar with these themes, but the fear of disclosure. So I suppose people had a fear of sharing personal information and the impact that may have within their own workplaces. So that is a quite common barrier to I suppose disability inclusion in the workplace, is the fear of disclosure. The importance of creating a psychological safety within the workplace, so ensuring that the employers have created a supportive environment where people feel safe to disclose that they have a disability, providing different options to disclose their disability. So it's really important that we have flexible approaches, different ways that people can disclose their disability, and also, which is really important, is that they can disclose in a confidential way. The importance of reasonable accommodation, so that when people disclose that their disability, that there are appropriate adjustments or reasonable accommodations that can be implemented within a workplace. So and I think that's one of the important benefits if someone discloses that they have a disability, is that they can avail of reasonable accommodations within the workplace once the proper systems and processes are put in place. And as already mentioned, training. So training and education is key. So lack of training and education within the workplace becomes a major challenge for people, particularly for people with disabilities in the workplace, because their line managers, the leadership team, the senior management, they're unaware of the challenges that are faced within the workplace. And then finally, one of the themes that came up in the consultation process was the importance of workplace culture. So again, if we can do anything in the area of disability disclosure, it's shifting the mindset. It's getting people to build a disability inclusion in as part of the overall culture of the organization, and that will lead to, I suppose, long-term strategic changes in the area of the whole area of disability inclusion. So it's really important that we look at shifting the mindset, that we have that workplace culture that promotes disability inclusion, that's built into everything that the organization does. It becomes seamless. It becomes part of the everyday experience for everyone within the workplace. So there's some of the key themes that were identified in the actual in the consultation process. So we took those themes and we also looked at other challenges that are out there. So for example, we have data protection laws and key requirements under data protection, and how do we collect data in a confidential way, but how do we store the data? How do we use the data? How do we make sure that the data is not being misappropriately used and things like that? We also have things like lack of psychological safety within the workplace. We have non-reporting, where people aren't disclosing that they have a disability because of the fear or the impact, or that people are afraid that the organisation is not going to treat this information confidentiality, the confidentiality of the information, but also going to use the data that can I suppose support people with disabilities. And then we also have under the Disability Act, the government has set a target of 6% of employees of employees with disabilities in the public sector. So there are lots of challenges in relation to that with disability data collection, and how do we take those challenges and come up with appropriate solutions. And I think the toolkit has done that in quite a practical way, taking all those challenges and coming up with practical solutions to address the needs of people with disabilities. So I suppose there's lots of reasons of why we would develop a toolkit. So for example, we look at the key headings here. We have inclusion, we have addressing the barriers and providing support needs for people with disabilities, making sure that there is an impact of an impact on what we do and so on. So we have, for example, there are legal and compliance requirements that organizations need to undertake in relation to the Employment Equality Act, in relation to the Equal Status Acts and things like that. There's also Disability Act legislative requirements under employment and things like that. But also some of the impacts could be enhanced retention and employer reputation. They can be enhanced business performance, so you can attract a wider pool of talent. You can retain people who acquire disabilities, during their career at the organisation. But also, you can, you're making your organisation much more diverse and inclusive by attracting a wider pool of talent and things like that. So it's really important that we look at a number of streams. So enhancing the culture, enhancing equality, diversity and inclusion, making sure we address our legislative requirements, making sure we address our data collection, data protection legislative requirements and things like that. So lots of reasons why we would look at developing a toolkit. And we've taken on board those elements and implemented them into the design of the toolkit itself. So the toolkit itself is broken into a number of sections, which I'll talk about in a second. There's two main sections. There's section A and there's section B. But as part of the process, as we went through the consultation process, as we did our research and we went through the process, we identified 4 key areas which were really important for an organisation to, I suppose, to address in their journey about disability data collection. The first one was starting your journey to create an inclusive workplace or an accessible workplace. So how do you start the process? How do you set your foundations? You put your foundations in place so that you can develop effective systems and processes. The second area is, how do you create psychological safety at work? So how do you create psychological safety at work? The third area is collecting and organizing your and storing your data. So making sure you collect it in the right manner, make sure that you store it in the right manner, and make sure that you don't use the data in the wrong way. And the fourth area that we recognize is really important is continuous improvement. So you've started your journey. You've already created a place which is psychologically safe for people. You've collected all your data. But how do you build on that? How do you continuously improve on accessibility? How do you make it part of your DNA and make sure that it becomes seamless within the organization? So that's why we picked number 4, which is ongoing data management and continuous improvement. So when we look at the guidelines, then, as I said, we have a section A and a section B, and they're clearly in the guidelines with different using different colors and numbers and stuff like that. But you can see there on the screen, section A is setting the foundations. So it's really about getting your base in place so that you can really build on creating that disability inclusive workplace and I suppose promoting the whole area of disability disclosure. And then the second area is section B, which is a 4-stage approach to best practice workplace disability data collection. I'll just go into two of the sections and highlight some of the key themes in both sections. So for example, section A, there's a lot of terminology that we're using here, like psychological safety, where disability disclosure, reasonable accommodations. So it's really important that in the start of the guidelines, it explains what those key terms are. It explains what they mean. It explains the relevant legislation under the general data protection laws and things like that. In section A, we also highlight the importance of why a toolkit is needed. So again, the benefits for your organizations, the legislative requirements that you may have, but also the challenges you will face if you don't actually, follow some of the guidelines in the toolkits and so on. There's lots of challenges with disability data collection. So in the toolkit, we give you some key information how you can overcome some of those challenges and ways to actually, to put systems in place to allow you collect your data in the most efficient way. We do have a section on legislation. And again, I suppose we talk about GDPR legislation, we talk about equality legislation, we talk about disability legislation, we talk about the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, policies, and so on. So again, to give you a better understanding of the legislative drivers for that you have to be mindful of in the day-to-day work that you do. And then we have a section on the consultation process that took place and some of the findings of that consultation process, which I've already mentioned a few minutes ago. In section B, then, the data you can see there's the we call it the 4-stage approach. So step 1 is the leadership. So a leadership alignment and commitment to disability inclusion, or a kind of the strategy piece that I mentioned at the start of the conversation about having the right structures in place to, I suppose, implement change. We'll talk about leadership in a second. We'll talk about having a point of contact to address accessibility, or maybe having an access team or an access steering group. That's all really important as part of your strategy and your framework to, I suppose, to embed accessibility and disability inclusion, what you do. The second section covers creating psychological safety in the workplace. The third section, which I'll go into in 2 minutes, is processing your disability data and how you would do that, or ways that you can do that. And the fourth section is continuous improvement. So again, if we skip on to the next slide, what we have here is, I suppose, starting your journey is all about leadership and how you develop a strategy. The second area, psychological safety. How do you create psychological safety in the workplace? So the toolkit gives you that information and gives you good resources and guides on how to do it. The third area, as I mentioned, was collecting data. So how do you collect your data and how do you manage the data? So it's really important you have, I suppose, proper procedures in place to manage your data so that you don't, that you're following, I suppose, legislative requirements under privacy, under maintaining, correct databases and things like that. And then number 4 is continuous improvement. So how do you make use of the data that you've collected? How do you improve accessibility? How do you improve disability inclusion on an ongoing basis? And how do you enhance the workplace culture that you've already created? So I suppose it's the ongoing journey, so that we're always thinking about disability inclusion, but also we're also creating more I suppose, diverse workplaces for everyone to bring their best to work and so on. So as I mentioned, I'll just have 4 slides and then I'll conclude. The first section is B1 is leadership alignment and commitment. So it's really important that we have buy-in, or we have a top-down approach to disability inclusion or accessibility. So what's really important is that we get the buy-in from the top. As I often say, it's much easier to walk down the ladder than it is to walk up the ladder. So if we can get the senior management on board, and whether that's through training, whether that's through awareness, whether that's through sponsorship, that they sponsor the whole area of disability inclusion. It's also really important that we appoint people with responsibility within our organizations to champion or to drive the disability agenda. You may need to carry out some strategic reviews of where you are in relation to accessibility, and you may need to roll out training, which is really important. Ongoing education and training and awareness is going to be really key. And then you would develop an access policy and plan. So the first section, section B1 of the guidelines really talks about how you can address your leadership alignment and commitment and all the things you need to do, whether it's the training, whether it's the policy, whether it's appointing people with responsibility. And it's also the importance of having that top-down approach to accessibility. The second section covers in section B2 covers creating psychological safety in your workplace, the importance of leading by example, so making sure that people can see that they're within the culture of the organization, that we are committed to the whole area of disability inclusion, encouraging communication, providing relevant training, having documents outlining your core values in relation to disability inclusion, and I suppose developing and encouraging the importance of having a reasonable accommodation passports. So again, the reasonable accommodation passport can transfer across to when people are moving from different business units, but it brings all the data with that person. So the passport allows people to, it gives information about the reasonable accommodations that they've already got in a different department that they may need in another department and things like that. This section, section B3, then is really important. I suppose it's about processing disability data in the workplace. And as you can see on the slide, we're talking about how do you prepare for data collection? How do you actually collect the data itself? How do you organize and store the data? How do you report on the data? And how do you communicate the data collection findings? All whilst taking into account that there are legislative requirements in relation to collecting data, protecting people's privacy, but also making sure you have the right systems in place. So collecting, organizing, storing, reporting the data, and so on. And then the fourth section, so you've set the foundations, you have the leadership commitment, you've created an organization that, the psychological safety elements, you've collected the data, whether it's through different formats, whether it's through surveys, whether it's through questionnaires, whether it's through focus groups, and you have everything in place. Now you need to continuously improve on what you do. So it might be things like establishing an employee resource group who become a group that can actually, I suppose, influence or drive change within the organization. It might be gathering feedback on disability inclusive workplace culture via focus groups, via surveys, via questionnaires. It might be staying informed about legislative requirements. This whole area of disability inclusion, it's constantly enhancing. As Anna has already said, there's lots of different training courses, education courses, awareness courses that we can go on, but we're all learning every day in relation to disability inclusion, and we'll all continue to learn, I suppose, to make our organizations more inclusive and so on. And then I suppose you're going to need a budget towards enhancing accessibility. So the final step is really important. It's making sure you've collected your data, you've improved your systems. Now you need to continue focus on accessibility. One simple thing I would even say to people, if you take nothing else from today, put disability inclusion on your agenda of your weekly meetings, your monthly meetings, your meetings that you're having. Then it becomes front and center in the organization. So a simple change is just putting something like disability inclusion or accessibility on your weekly agendas for your management meetings or your team meetings can make such a difference. Final area is that the guidelines themselves are designed for both larger organizations but also small to medium enterprises, and there is a fact sheet at the back of the guidelines which covers, I suppose, disability disclosure for small businesses. And in that 2-page fact sheet, you get maybe 10 or 12 or 15 different tips on how you can improve, whether it's your legal requirements, whether it's your policies and procedures, or whether it's making your workplaces more inclusive and so on. So there's lots of good learnings and resources in the toolkit. As I said at the start, challenge you to pick a few teams and things like that at the start, but things like leadership, things like psychological safety, and the importance of creating a workplace that allows people to feel comfortable that they can disclose their disability, flexibility, adaptability, reasonable accommodations, enhancing the culture, enhancing diversity and inclusion. I'll stop there. Probably can go on for another 5 minutes with a list of things. But look, as I said to everyone, pick up the guidelines, take a look at them. And as Anna has said, feel free to come back to any of us at any stage with any questions or queries, or if you have any concerns or areas that you're unsure about how you can make changes, get in touch. And the idea is that it's a collaborative approach here. You can come back to any of us, and we can help you to drive change within your organizations, and hopefully create those and continue to create those disability inclusive workplaces. So I'll hand back to Anna, if that's okay. And thanks for your time.
Yes. Thank you so much, Owen. I think it's so difficult to summarize such a big piece of work, and we really, really appreciate, all what you and the OHAC team have done. We are really hoping, that you will all find the toolkit beneficial. But for any questions or related trainings or how to support, feel free to contact us at info@employersforchange.ie, because the toolkit is there, but we are more than happy to have discussions around this. And I also want to thank our CEO, Jean McDonough, for all the support provided for the toolkit, and as Owen mentioned, my colleague Claire Hayes, who is head of policy research and government engagement, for her guidance. So it was really a collaborative effort to create it. And now we are moving to another exciting part of this session. If we can be spotlighted, we will have three speakers on the panel for today. And as we heard, from the toolkit, it's not just about collecting disability data, but it's really around creating conditions that make disclosure safer, more respectful, and accessible, both for employees and organizations. So it really looks at the journey from leadership commitment to psychological safety to how data is collected and managed, and then how organizational should continue to improve. So we want to bring these core ideas to life, and in this panel discussion, we will attempt to do that. We will explore what disclosure looks and feels like in practice and what helps to build trust and environments where people feel safer to share. So I wanted to introduce our fantastic panel. So we have Breandan, who is a disability strategist, educator, and leadership coach with over 25 years of experience from corporate, startup, and academic sectors. He's an adjunct professor at New York University, teaching disability inclusive organizational strategy, and also teaching at the TU Dublin entrepreneurship course for people with disabilities that is supported and run by Open Doors. Previously, he spent over 15 years in investment banking in London and New York, rising to global leadership roles during a period of progressive sight loss due to an inherited retinal disease. Based in London, Breandan contributes to disability leadership and practice internationally. So you are really very welcome. Thanks for being here. Our next panelist is Niah, who is the Equality, Diversity, Inclusion and Wellbeing Lead at IDEA Ireland. Niah has played a central role in shaping the organization's approach to inclusion, leading a cross-organizational team focusing on embedding inclusive behaviors, strengthening policy, and creating mechanisms to amplify underrepresented voices. Her work has contributed to IDEA receiving significant recognitions, for example, Investors in Disability Gold Accreditation, Public Sector Organization of the Year, and most recently, IDEA is being nominated as the finalist of the Business and Finance ECG Awards in the category of Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion Initiatives. So good luck for that. We are really delighted to have Kaitlyn with us today as well, who is the Vice President and Regional Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Lead for EMEA in Northern Trust. Her primary areas of focus include identifying innovative solutions and implementing policies and programs across EMEA offices to achieve a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace. Prior to her role in inclusion, she has been leading EMEA corporate philanthropy initiatives, and she also has over 10 years of experience as social impact practitioner, designing and developing engagement strategies to connect businesses and communities across the US and EMEA regions. So we have really a breadth and wealth of experiences in the area of inclusion and beyond. Just 1 second, I will stop sharing so you can see us better. And we are all spotlighted. Great. Sorry. Great. And just wanted to start maybe more with this human side, because as we heard, one of the strongest themes in the toolkit is really psychological safety. So I will start with you, Breandan, if that's okay. From your lived experience, what have managers or leaders done intentionally or not that made you feel safe or unsafe to disclose your disability? And what should leaders learn from that?
Thanks a lot, Anna. And the framing of that question was kind of deliberate on our part because we wanted to speak to the audience of employers that are assembled here today, whether it be corporate sector, public sector, or charity and non-profit sectors. So you'll notice just in the way Anna has framed the question there's almost feels like a them and us. There's folks with disabilities, deaf, disabled, or neurodivergent. I'm part of that community. I'm losing my vision for the last 20 years because of an inherited retinal disease. And yet, when we think about it, there isn't really a them and us, because among us all here gathered, employers, managers, recruiters, how many of us ourselves have some kind of difference in our body or mind that is sufficiently different to present challenges in the environments where we live and work. So I just wanted to mention the fact that, of course, we think about disability inclusion as, maybe a them and us scenario. Some people think, yeah, there's a bunch of people over there called disabled people. What do we do to include them in the workforce? What are our responsibilities of employers? But, in some ways that's an illusion, because we're all differently bodied and differently minded. And I'll come back to that a bit later because of what it might mean for business and for impact. But in my own experience, just going back in time to when I worked in my first job in a bank in London. So as you can tell, I'm Irish, born and bred in County Monaghan. Don't hold that against me. But when I arrived in the first job, my sight was fine. I could pretty much see whatever I needed to see. And early on in the first few years, I started to notice problems with my vision. So it was harder to see the computer screen, which in a bank is a problem, right? Because you have to be quite precise when you're looking at numbers and spreadsheets and all of that. And it took me a while. I definitely felt afraid and uncertain about what was going on, what was I going to do about it. So that made disclosure for me difficult. It took me time. But when I did share with my employer this diagnosis that I'd received, I was able to get the reasonable accommodations. It was quite straightforward because I essentially needed a piece of software, and I found out what that was and I started to use it, and my employer paid for it. It didn't cost that much and it made all the difference. So that's kind of what happened to me. But I want to share one example of a conversation that really stuck out in my mind. It was a new boss that I had in that same job after a few years. And we were just having a catch up one day in his office. And he asked me the question, what can I do to make you as successful as possible? What can I do to make you as successful as possible in this role, in this company, And that question never left me. And I kind of fell off the chair because I really didn't know how to answer it. And what he was doing in that question, I realized, is a few things. One, clear intention. He wasn't waiting on me to ask for something. He was signaling to me the fact that he saw disclosure not as some kind of risky thing, but rather as a partnership. So he was signaling the fact to me that he intended for me to be supported and included and as successful as I could be. And just that reframing of disclosure away from a risky conversation to something that was much more supportive and partnering really impressed me. And it made me think about things that I may not have asked him for, like getting a larger screen or sitting away from the window so there was less glare on my computer screen. And these are things that I thought about and did ask him for. So that's a question that I wanted to share with you and encourage you all as bosses, as managers, to consider asking, because it's such a curious and open question. You don't know where it might go. And what you are doing is creating conditions that encourage staff to share whatever it is they might need. So clear intention, I think, counts for a lot. In the end, disclosure doesn't come from a policy. It comes from a culture, and a culture based on trust. So if you can proactively and clearly signal your intention to be inclusive and supportive, that can be a really transformative way to support the right conditions. And in the end, hopefully, staff will feel supported. And when they're ready to disclose, which might take some time, but at least you've been very clear on those conditions and you've created the right conditions to Owen's point earlier about psychological safety, that isn't something we can write in a document or a policy or a website. It's something as managers and leaders that we need to be creating and signaling. That's our job. And that for me was one of the most powerful experiences in my 25 years of working with a disability, when my boss sprang that question on me. And it's actually one that I've used a lot now in my teaching work and coaching work. It's something that I can always ask students or clients or coaches, because you never know what it is they might ask for to help be as successful as they can be.
This is amazing. Thank you so much. I think there is just so much in what you shared, and we really appreciate you sharing your lived experience. And I think there is so much to take away. Definitely that it's not them and us, because having a disability is part of the human experience. And then the longer we live, the more of us will experience that. So that's amazing. And also your experience is so good to have such a strong and powerful positive one, and to learn from for us that a manager can make a huge positive difference just by having one question and having more this focus on the strength rather than, maybe having, any kind of focus on other aspects of disability or performance as such. That's really great. Thank you so much. Niah, I will go to you next because one of the themes that we discussed earlier, and what came up, psychologically safety, but also trust. And we know that how important it is in the whole IDA process. So can you talk us through what it looks like in practice, and why do you think that approach matters?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you don't have trust, there's a huge fundamental piece of the process missing, because individuals with disabilities or with conditions, they have many experiences over their lifetime of having to fight for something, maybe not being believed about something, or just kind of going, well, I said something and now I'm having that held against me. And it's that fear of disclosure piece that's referenced in the toolkit. And as you go in, and I think it's in section 5, a little bit down, 5.3, I think, that psychological safety piece means when I bring something up, I'm not going to have that held against me for the rest of my life. I'm still going to be considered for promotion. I'm still going to be considered capable in my own right. And if I need a bit of help, I'm happy to ask, or I feel safe to ask, I suppose. So one of the things we found, and I mean, IDA has had an EDI initiative since 2017. So we're a good few years into it. We've had a lot of trial and error, a lot of error. So it's not that this happens overnight. So it's this very sort of slow build example, like I say, trust is built in whispers. It's not the big thing that you do. It's not the big event that happens. It's the small one-to-one moments, like what Breandan was saying with his manager, that, oh, I'm safe here. Oh, I can come forward here. And what we found was that people were afraid that it would be held against them. So we're like, okay, well, how can you provide support if you don't know who needs support or what they need, or even why they might need it? So I said, well, what if we just took away that need to say who you are? So we came up through a lot of collaboration, and I cannot stress that enough. It was probably about 2.5 years of collaboration with team members, with members of our equality, diversity, inclusion, well-being team, of how might we do this. And then we brought that process to HR, going, here's what we'd like to try. So people can come forward, named or unnamed, to request accommodations. IDA does not require a formal diagnosis to provide reasonable accommodations. You let us know what we need, and we'll figure out how to put it in place. And then we'll come back to you to go, okay, now how is this working? Do we need to tweak it? And it's kind of a continuous assess, address, report function, which is part of our public sector duty. But building in the anonymity, for someone to come in and say, do you know what, I don't really know Niah that well. I don't really feel comfortable to chat to her just yet, but I know Monica. So I'm going to go chat to Monica about this. Monica's then going to have a chat and go, well, actually, have you talked to Niah about that? I think she helped me with X, Y, and Z. I think that would be, she'd be a great person to start with. And the amount of times those sort of whispers of, have you talked to Niah? Have you talked to somebody on the EDI team? Have you asked them this question? I'm sure that there's something that they could do. And then sort of wrapping the process around the person. So we're not expecting every disability to be the same. We're not expecting every neurodiverse condition to be the same. We're allowing people to show up as themselves, whether they know what they need or don't know what they need, and go, okay, here's what's going to happen over the next 6 months. Does that work for you? Does that not work for you? Where can we tweak it a little bit so it's a bit smoother for you? Or are we at the start of maybe somebody who doesn't know what is quite not working for them, but they're going, I can't quite figure out how to read this report. I can't quite figure out how to say certain words. Like, I don't know what's happening. That's a much longer one-to-one process that the human centeredness of it has to be at the forefront. Otherwise, everything else just feels like, okay, would you hurry up and tell me what you need, because I have other stuff to do. And I would have a non-apparent disability. I was diagnosed with endometriosis last year, but that's been a 4-year process of trying to get a diagnosis, multiple surgeries, multiple bits of time out of work. And you start to learn very quickly who's willing to take the time and who isn't, and that bleeds through. So when we look at psychological safety, your small actions will bleed through. And if you haven't started yet, okay, you haven't started yet, but now take just section 1 of the toolkit, talking about, all right, how are we going to talk about disability? And as you keep doing it, month on month, quarter on quarter, year on year, that trust and that psychological safety will build up, because people see, oh, they actually mean what they say.
This is fantastic, and I think like this is really the gold standard, to have like not force people, to share their diagnosis, but really focus on what will enable them to perform to their best. And to Breandan's points, it's about partnership. And thank you for mentioning that this is really a journey, which is about partnership and involving people with lived experience in designing, co-designing, and leading this initiative. So thanks a lot for that. Regarding the different ways of disclosure, Kaitlyn, we know that there is the idea of self-identification, which is mentioned in the toolkit as well. And I'm aware that Northern Trust had a global campaign. So can you tell us a bit more about it, and what were maybe the key building blocks that made it possible, and what are some learnings from it?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much, Anna. And just a massive well done and congratulations to everybody involved for the launch of this toolkit. It is hugely important, and I have a feeling it's going to be used amongst many employers, and a fantastic resource. So well done. And very excited to be here. Yes, so for us at Northern Trust, our global self-identification campaign, it was more than just collecting data, and I think that was really important for us to emphasize early on. It's really about gaining a better understanding of the breadth and the diversity of our colleagues and employees within our workforce. And I think that that's something that the toolkit really enforces, and I think Breandan and Niah and Eoin have all touched on it. It's trust, it's intent, and then it's implementation and how that is executed. So as for the campaign itself, we launched it at the end of 2024. And there were a few main steps. First and foremost, as you can imagine, the foundational governance aspect was critical, and a big piece of work for us. We have 24,000 employees globally, 23 jurisdictions, ensuring that we comply with legal. Privacy and regulatory issues was a big one. It was the most in-depth, colorful spreadsheet I think that I ever had the privilege of working in, with regards to what we can collect, where we can collect it, and the processes for doing that. The second one was really focused on kind of language and clarity. So I want to shout out Open Doors for being really great subject matter experts and partners to sense check definitions, FAQs, terminology. That was critical for us. From a disability perspective, particularly, it was important for us that the messaging was not centered around the label of what do you have, but what helps you do your best work. And this campaign is really ensuring that we are supporting our employees to feel supported and empowered to do their best work with whatever they have and whatever their lived experience is. And so we wanted to make that very, very clear. And then the last part of that was we made it very clear that it was voluntary. and confidential, and that you can change it at any point in time. So it sits in our HR system, Workday, and anybody can update that at any point in time. But we repeated that message often because it was really important for us. And then the third one, and I think Eoin mentioned this as part of the toolkit as well, was senior leadership buy-in. And that's more than just kind of approving it and signing it and being in those executive forums where they're like, yep, it's good to go. It's how are you conveying this in your town halls or in your leadership forums and saying, I personally have done this and this is why it matters. I encourage you all to do the same. That signaling, I think, has been really, really critical. That role modeling has kind of impacted our culture and that psychological safety. And it's really reinforced kind of the importance and the buy-in around that. So I would say that those are kind of the key kind of foundation blocks in terms of learnings. The biggest one is really explaining the why. So when you're communicating this to your employees, like, why is this important? And then also, how does it correspond to your values as an organization, if that is core to how you operate and your mission? We have one of our culture behaviors is being intentionally inclusive. So it was really important for us to anchor on that, and that this is an initiative campaign as part of that. And then I think the last one that is going to be a through message for today is it is certainly a journey. So candidly, we are behind our global banking peers in this space when it comes to self-identification and disclosure and collecting this data. I did a quick co-pilot review of what some of the GSIBs in the industry and their kind of disclosure rates, and it's somewhere between 10 and 15% from a disability point of view. We are nowhere near that transparently, but understanding that we have a shared responsibility amongst our leadership team and our organization to continue this work and the steps that are needed, and that it is consistency pays in this space, and it's that kind of dedication and commitment over time that we'll hopefully see some improvements and more kind of disclosures in that space. So I'll stop there because I probably could touch on that for a while, but
yeah, I could listen to all of you for hours, I think. But yeah, thank you for mentioning. And I think all of you are mentioning that this is a journey, it's partnership. And I think, and really thank you, Kaitlyn, for openly sharing, that it's just important to start the journey. And it's okay if you haven't started, or it's okay, if you haven't figured out everything, because nobody has. It's really a journey and iteration and learning. And I really like the aspect that you highlighted, communications, and how leaders are really important in that, and connecting the why, because many times we feel that people are afraid to disclose because they think it's only for data collection, like why is it needed, where it will be stored. So to Owen's point as well, this data security is so important, but to understand, like, why is this data collected? It's just that for the sake of collecting data, but the organization is making regular changes. So that's really great. And we also know that there is still a lot of stigma around disclosure and disabilities in general. Even in the chat, we have some great comments, around the language that we use. So it's really still a complex topic. And we also know that 70% of the disabilities we are acquiring, as adults, and that there is 80% which are invisible. So it's really very complex in general. So Niah, for employers who are listening today, like what they can take away to give more control back to the employees who are considering disclosure, maybe those who are newly diagnosed, or about how maybe those who are unsure about what supports they might need.
Yeah, so we would, and very generally, bucket disclosures into two sort of areas. One is proactive and one is reactive. So proactive is where someone comes in to the office or gives a phone call or whatever and goes, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I have a diagnosis of blank. I'll use myself as an example. Called up my boss one day, go, hey, I think I have endometriosis. I don't need anything at the minute, but I'm just kind of giving you a heads up. Wonderful. Nothing really happens then. She comes back a few months later to check how I'm doing, and just kind of light touch at that stage. That individual may come back a few months later and go, actually, I do need support in X, Y, and Z fashion. We then go through, and I see a few comments in the chat around, okay, are you happy to be named in this process, or do you wish to remain unnamed in this process? If someone is newly diagnosed, there can be a lot of sort of emotional world spinning stuff that may be happening, and sometimes not. Sometimes people go, look, I've known I was neurodivergent for a long time. Now I just have a piece of paper to confirm it. And other times there's a lot of life stuff that tends to also need to be impacted at that same time. So it just depends. Everybody's different. So the person then agrees what they feel comfortable with. If they may take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month to decide if they're comfortable to be named, and I can go into my HR and OD team and say, look, here's the supports that I need. How can we go about putting this in place for the person? If they're unnamed, then I explain kind of what the next steps are to the person. They kind of go away and relax a little bit. I go in and say, I need an accommodation. This is what I need it for. They're not comfortable to be named at this time. Full stop. So then we work around how we might put something in place. I go back to the individual then and say, here's the process that we've thought up. Does this work for you? And if there's at any point where a person's name might need to appear, say in a purchase order or anything along those lines, something even minimal, I'm going to flag that to the individual to say, okay, here's where you might be identifiable. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but I'm just flagging it for you now. And what the kind of step-by-step outline for the person does is it gives them the control. I'm just the facilitator of a process. This has nothing to do with me whatsoever. They get to call the shots. They get to decide, okay, I'm actually comfortable to do this. And we've supported people. The first one would have been during COVID. And it was 2 years before the person felt comfortable for me to know who they were. They were working with a member of the EDI team. And again, working with them for 2 years, put multiple accommodations in place for them. And then one day I got a message, so-and-so's happy for you to know who they are. This is their name and these are the different accommodations. And I was delighted. Not that, like, I was delighted that we were able to help, but I was delighted that after so long, they finally trusted us. And they were willing to then share their stories. And if you're not at that space, again, that's 2 years worth of a really intense, really long process in a really intense time globally. Start really small, bring in experts for fireside chats, have people externally share their stories. And it's a great opportunity for leadership to then get involved as well. Because if a leader is sitting there asking questions for somebody who is a wheelchair user, that's a chance for them to learn in front of everyone. No one is an expert in this space. I'm certainly not. I can talk about my lived experience. I can advocate for my colleagues across the globe and their experiences and what they're willing to share. But it's that you don't have to be an expert in this, but we need to be effective in this. And effectiveness requires collaboration. And I cannot stress that enough. Find different ways, like our most recent Equality, Diversity and Inclusion survey is part of the gold accreditation with the Irish Centre for Diversity and their Investors in Diversity process. But all of it's anonymous. So people can put forward feedback, and it doesn't matter who they are, it matters what they have to say, and we can start the trust building process. So they can meet us then with the communication and how we can improve and showing up for work and all this stuff, but it's a step-by-step piece that I'm just the facilitator of. IDA is just the facilitator of. The person gets to own it, and that's where I think a huge sense of empowerment and kind of you can relax a little bit because I'm not going to be forced to do anything that I don't feel comfortable doing.
I think that's fantastic. And then you mentioned that it's a journey, for the organization, what the individual themselves, because many times we say that the person is the expert of their condition, which is true, but it's a process for them as well to become an expert and kind of to learn about that. There is definitely a lot of interest in the chat for this anonymous process. So maybe we can follow up with them or answer more. I'm just aware that we have around 6 minutes for the panel. So I will go to Kaitlyn next. And we talked now about more these formal processes as well and the data collection, but wanted to ask as well that beyond that, what has made the biggest difference in normalizing disability inclusion in your organizational culture, and maybe what were the practical enablers?
So from a cultural standpoint, those cultural enablers, I would really lean on the visibility and the role modeling. And I'm sure other kind of employers on the line can attest to the power of storytelling and sharing lived experiences. We have a pretty amazing This Is Me style campaign across various lived experiences and dimensions, which has been incredibly well received, of just, again, normalizing the conversation around it and really centering this in this is what it means to be human and to be understood, and that it shouldn't be hidden and something to be fearful of or to have a stigma around. So that's been really huge. We had two executives that had come together for a fireside chat, talking about their lived experience being neurodivergent, and managing up as well as managing down in their careers, and how they've had very successful careers. But we're able to talk to kind of the challenges and the barriers and how they've navigated that. And that has been hugely well received. And again, just kind of normalizing it, and kind of enhancing our cultural understanding, and psychological safety. And then I think Breandan had touched on this earlier. It's that manager capability. So oftentimes disclosure happens at that front line, right? And I think how managers address and respond can make or break it. And so ensuring that our managers are equipped and trained to have, lead with empathy first. You're not diagnosing anything, you're not fixing anything, but you're there to listen and to ask good questions and to say, how can I support you and how can I navigate the various elements within our workplace that are here to support you, to ensure that you can do your best work. And so we've done a ton of kind of manager trainings, deep dives, and kind of more support for them in that space. But those are a few of the things. And then just the practical ones, like so much of the accessible technology, the tools, the workplace adjustments, our inclusive hiring practices. I mean, that could be a whole other session with regards to kind of starting early at the application and the interviewing process, when it comes to this stuff. So, yep, those are just a few things, but I can't kind of reiterate enough that, if it's not felt and permeated across the organization, nobody's going to feel safe to disclose and to share this. And you kind of failed at the first hurdle, I think. So hopefully that helps.
No, that's great. And I think it's so important that this has to be embedded in the culture, and there is not enough communication that we can do around it. And also that you mentioned, the manager skills, because we expect managers, to suddenly be able to manage it. But it's great to hear that, that you acknowledge that there needs to be support for them as well to how to do best. So with my last question, and related to that, I will go back to you, Breandan. And I'm really curious about, from your experience, having, the lived experience, but also your experience for so many years to managing people. What have you found works best when responding to disclosure and, for example, a request for a reasonable accommodation?
Thanks, Anna. I'll give a short story where me as the disabled employee was also managing people. So I had a specific situation where someone came to knock on my office door to ask if they could speak with me for a moment or two. And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. We can get some time in the diary. I have time in the afternoon. It was a guy. They started to cry. Not uncontrollably, but I could hear, so I can't see facial expressions well, so I couldn't see, let's say, the visual signs. But I could hear their voice breaking, asking, would it be okay if we had a quick chat now? And of course, the signal to me was, this is urgent, this is important. And we went into my room and closed the door. And I just asked, tell me what's going on. Is everything okay? And he proceeded to tell me that, he's under a lot of pressure at home. His wedding is coming up in a short period, and he was feeling very overwhelmed by all of that pressure, and also with the job, and I've often wondered, when I look back on that situation, going back to what we've said about trust, would he have come to speak to me, and would he have felt comfortable, sharing that emotion if I was perfectly sighted? You know what I mean? In other words, I felt that it was important for me to disclose and to role model, because how can I expect anyone else to come with their own situation, whether it's a disability scenario or anything else that might happen to go wrong or be difficult? So, I said, look, whatever we need to do, we'll do it. If you'd like to work from home, and he had some appointments, he wanted to go see his doctor, I says, look, we can smooth the path. You can work from home for a week. This is pre-COVID, so that wasn't so common. And just get to the appointments you need to get to. I'll partner with you on this. We'll get the direct boss up to speed, and no one else needs to know what's happening. As far as I'm concerned, you've got to work from home for a week to take care of some things of a medical nature, and he was happy with that. And he was able to take the time to get sorted out. And I checked in with him, and he got through that period. And I only share that not to say that I deserve a badge of honor for it, but just to share that just because I have a disability doesn't mean I'm an expert. I was actually slightly afraid in that conversation. I was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I was afraid, what might happen if I was about to lose someone who was a really good member of staff. Perhaps they might leave or resign or be out on extended leave due to illness. So fear is natural. I think everyone coming to the disclosure conversation, whether you are the one disclosing or you're the listening side, there's fear in the room, so we have that common and very human experience of fear, and it's natural. It is very natural. And there's a whole other day's conversation we could ask about why we feel so afraid. I deep down, I suspect that many people fear a conversation around disability because they're worried about how they would cope, and they mightn't want it in their own life, and they don't want to be so close to it. I certainly would rather not lose my vision, so I'm to some degree afraid of disability. So that fear is very natural and very human, but here's two things that I do want to share that I feel are really important. Number one, we need to move beyond disability as a diagnosis and think of it as an experience. So that situation I shared taught me a lot because I was thinking diagnosis. I was thinking, what's the doctor going to say this is, etc., etc. But actually, disability was the intersection of body and mind and barriers in the environment, So disability not as diagnosis, but as experience. Because in the end, all that guy needed, that staff member needed, was some flexibility. And the current work structure and norm was a barrier. So the disability wasn't his state of mind or whatever diagnosis he did or didn't have. The disability was the inflexible structure, and the experience of disability could be improved by getting rid of that barrier. So think of disability not as diagnosis, but as experience, because then as managers and bosses, we can actually do something about those barriers. So we can actually take our part in this journey. And then the last thing I'll say is, don't think of disability as a special case. Think of it as a test of your leadership, because when you think about it, it's just an example of a difficult conversation. It's an example of a challenge. Now, in businesses or county councils or any employment setting, when we are leaders and managers, we're the ones that are supposed to face difficulty and manage through uncertainty. So there's no point in us saying disability is a special case, because actually, if it's an example of challenge, then we have to be able to meet that challenge, and we have to reveal the reality of our culture. So if we're saying we're inclusive and we're saying we care about performance and impacting our customers or our service users, then disability is here to test us on that, to see when the chips are down, do we actually mean what we say? So we need to be able to meet that moment, because in the end, if we're able to meet it with our staff and our employees and to work through that in a spirit of trust and partnership, then guess what that means for the ability to know our customers, the ability to know our constituents, to know our patients, whatever the service user might be that we're reaching. So I feel It's natural to be afraid. It is a difficult topic, but it is our job as leaders, managers, bosses in any sector to actually meet that moment, because if we can meet that moment and we can be inclusive of disability, guess what that's going to do to our constituents, our people, our customers? It's going to mean we're much more informed and we have more innovation, more insight, more performance. So it's not just the right thing to do, but it's actually good for impact and good for business.
That's fantastic, I think, to end on that. And I really want to thank all of you. And there was just so much in this last answer itself. But overall, in the panel, I think it's just fantastic. I think you really highlighted so much. But, you know, like just to mention a couple, like getting disclosure really starts with trust and leadership, management aspect, you know, the skills as well. And just this partnership that was really highlighted so much as well. It really requires also practical systems and supportive conversations and real commitment to inclusion. If that is there, I guess, you know, we can overcome all these fears and really treat it, as mentioned several times, as just a human experience. And in the end, we are just two humans or several humans talking to each other about maybe a more difficult topic, but it's just a human conversation. So thank you so much to the panel. I think it was really wonderful. It will be recorded so we can rewatch it and take all the little nuggets and the practical tips from that. I think we will have time maybe for one question, and for the other ones that we cannot answer now, we will be able to follow up on that. But I think a lot was answered during the panel already, and you can feel free to reach out to us. And just before we go into the question, I will mention that Mo will put as well a feedback form. So we are really curious, you know, like what did you like, and also what other topics you would like our support with, and you are more than welcome, you know, to contact us. Mo, I will go to you. Maybe if you can highlight one question that maybe wasn't covered in the panel that we could have.
Thank you very much. I think we have an hand raised. Maybe that will be better. But one of the questions that was so frequent in the chat was about the anonymous process from IDA, how it works, and how do managers, line managers, like really align to ensure they are able to provide a service for employees?
We leave the manager engagement piece to when the individual, whether they're a manager or a team member, feels comfortable. So if I have a manager coming in looking for support, the manager, that person, that individual gets to make the call of when to involve more people into the process. When it comes to a team member coming in, how it works is they may come to me directly, they may come to their manager directly, they may come to a member of the EDI team directly, or even HR directly. So whoever that initial point of contact is has to check with the individual. Are you happy for me to talk to Niah and let Niah know who you are, or not happy? They can decide that then, and again, that may take them a few weeks to decide, or they may decide right away. I think best practice is to give somebody kind of 24 hours or a business day or two to kind of think it over, just so people aren't rushing or they feel obligated to share. So that it's very much led at the pace of what the individual is comfortable with. So if we need to, you know, have a conversation with a manager, we sit down with the team member, or I would sit down with the team member, whoever that point of contact is, to go, okay, here's what we think that this might look like. Here's the outcomes. Does this make sense? And in a perfect world, we equip the team member to have the conversation with the manager, because it's very important. And I think it's been touched on a lot today. That relationship that you have as a manager to your team, that's where the trust needs to be built. So we're very happy to come in and be a facilitator and to help move things forward. But ideally, we want the person to be able to advocate for themselves, and for the managers to be able to be responsive and help get through that difficult conversation. And we make it very clear in our leadership training, it's okay to be uncomfortable. it happens. The only reason HR folks are good at having these conversations is because we have to have them all the time. So we get the practice. So it's again, it's very much individual led, and I know that we are like right up to time. So if anybody wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn to have a further conversation, very happy to do so.
I think that's fantastic, and I think there were just different comments as well in the chat and in the Q&A regarding, you know, agreeing with the practices or sharing more about their practices. I think, yeah, exactly. We are right on time, so I just want to respect that. I think we have one more two questions, you know, in the Q&A, so we can follow up on that if that's okay. Together with the panel, maybe we will write up something if that's fine. But just wanted to really thank everyone and for joining us, because this is such an important topic, and without organizations really being there and open to start our journey or, you know, continue your journey, we cannot make a difference in the society and in our employment rate. And wanted to say a special thank you to Eoin and OHAC again for creating this wonderful toolkit for employers, and I'm sure it will be so widely used and making a real difference. So that's fantastic. And a huge thank you to the panel. I think you were all brilliant. I think you know, we will share, of course, the chat, and then you can have a look. But they say, you know, really fantastic session. They really appreciate sharing the lived experience, sharing the practices. And yeah, the feedback is just amazing there. So thank you so much for being ready to share and contributing to the toolkit, and overall to contributing to this cause and all the work that you are doing. So as mentioned, we are more than happy to continue this conversation. And I know the panelists, you know, are happy, you know, to share more as well. So feel free to contact us. And as we mentioned, we provide trainings and consultations, and the toolkit is available on our website from now in the news section, but we will be sharing the recording as well. And somebody asked for the slides, so we can include that as well. So just fill in the feedback form and let us know, you know, what else you might need from us. But really, thank you so much for spending your morning with us and all the work that you are doing. And thanks again for the speakers and panelists. And thank you, Mo, for their support.
Thank you, Anna, for everything, for facilitating.
Thank you, Anna.
And hosting.
Thanks, everyone.
It's been
Thank you so
amazing.
much.